some of you know, I teach media ethics and values at Indiana University's media school. But truth be told, I never had a class in media ethics. And why is that? Well, our profession of journalism has been probably the last of the professions to come to the party and adopt certain sets of standards and codes of ethics, etc. Now, today, of course, we have all kinds of courses in our big schools of communication and journalism. We have scholars, textbooks, and codes of ethics in plentiful supply. And all of this is to help students and, more importantly, professionals to guide them in making good, sound, ethical choices that often come in a heartbeat or in the flash of an explosion. As I tell students, to be a journalist today in this 24/7 media environment means that we have to really think and behave much like the American military. And of course, the American military's aphorism is, we train like we're going to fight, and we fight like we've trained. But it wasn't always that way. You can read this New York Times story from September 1st of 1984 yourself. But I learned the hard way that we need to have codes of ethics and think about how we're going to behave in an instant. I was waiting for my luggage in the airport of Kabul, in Kabul, Afghanistan. Then it was under occupation by the Soviet armed forces, our Cold War adversary. And in a heartbeat, a terrorist bomb exploded, killing some 30 people and wounding more than 100. And in one second, I found myself lying on the floor, covered in blood. I quickly just figured that it was not my blood, but it was the blood of a severely injured fellow passenger. And I took off my belt using my combat medical training that I had earned in Vietnam, and I put a tourniquet around the man's severed arm. And with some other fellow passengers, we helped the wounded and the injured, of which there were many, to safety. And I didn't take any pictures. Well, and you can see this is a picture from my hotel room balcony every night that I was in Afghanistan. These are rockets being fired into the Soviet military compound every night by the Mujahideen guerrillas. Well, interestingly, 7 weeks later, fast forward to Washington, D.C., the editor of National Geographic called me to his office. And I could see he was upset. And he said, have you read the lead paragraphs of the author's story from this piece on Kabul? And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, the author writes about this bombing. Well, it was a bombing that the author had neither seen nor experienced, but he made it the lead of his story. And the editor of National Geographic, the veins bulging on his neck, took a pencil and broke it. And he said, damn it, we sent you to Afghanistan to take pictures, not to play Florence Nightingale. Well, today we now have a different feeling about situations like this, but that was a classic example of our personal ethics and our professional ethics coming into conflict. And ethics, of course, are those core principles of what makes us human. Now, when I think about, we're trying to explain photojournalism today, in my own profession of photojournalism, the core ideas here is that photojournalists have to take this unblinking look at life. We have to be faithful witnesses above all else. So I tell journalism students, the photojournalists have to take this unblinking look at life and provide testimony in the court of public opinion. We have to bear witness to history and give readers and viewers and clickers those moments of truth, moments that they would very often miss or never have an opportunity to see. This is from a famine in Ethiopia, political prisoners being held in El Salvador, a woman shooting up cocaine in a government office, cocaine and heroin in a government office in Washington, D.C., not more than a block from the White House. I've been all over the world working on a story called the opium poppy, the plant for good and evil. And the editors of National Geographic wanted to see how close the problem was to the White House. We lived in Russia for 5 years, those moments of truth. Being with the French Marines in West Africa and carrying out a badly wounded colleague. Or in Vietnam, where the last battle of the Vietnam War is still being fought over the genes, the genetic makeup of the Vietnamese people, who have the world's highest incidence of recorded incidence of birth defects per capita, principally because of the chemical defoliants that the United States sprayed in Vietnam, and the Agent Orange babies in several large hospitals in Vietnam. Or this private moment of recognition and grief and sorrow at the Vietnam Memorial. These uncomfortable truths, there's yours truly at what's the Israelis call the barrier, what the Palestinians call the apartheid wall that separates Palestine from Israel, and in this case of East Jerusalem. A wall that is 3 times higher than the Berlin Wall, but is euphemistically called by some a barrier. The photojournalists have 2 other principal jobs. One is to expose social evils, and we only need to think of the child labor legislation of the early 20th century that was made possible by the crusading photography of Louis Hine, a photographer and anthropologist, to expose these social evils like poverty and famine. These are from a famine in Bangladesh early in my career, or more recently to show, this was from a hospice run by Mother Teresa's organizations, the Sisters of Charity in Calcutta, India. And a third great tradition is to show us our connections to that larger family of humankind, how we are related one to another. The Russian Orthodox monks having their lunch at a church in Amana, Iowa, girls at an Islamic boarding school in Jakarta, or the women's side of the mosque in Brunei in Asia, and a synagogue in Moscow, or a Kaodai temple in Vietnam, or a Hindu worship ceremony in India. These moments of truth and beauty that link us all to a larger family of humankind. Now, at the other end of the continuum, we have photojournalists and their editors who may be little more than scavengers or voyeurs who turn tragedy into commodities for sale through a variety of media. This was from the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, and see a little girl who was shot by police for trying to, I guess she was stealing a chair, a plastic chair and several framed pictures. But the idea of the scavenger, the whole concept of photojournalism evokes a range of ethical problems, from subjectivity and objectivity and the power and the powerlessness of the people before our lens, truth and fiction. After all, setting up a photograph or staging a photograph or changing the content in the computer, these are lies. And then finally, the idea of the document versus the commodity. And I mentioned that the whole concept of objectivity versus subjectivity. All of you who own a camera know how emphatic the viewfinder is. That you leave out of the picture so much more than you include. That idea of objectivity versus subjectivity. And of course, in the end, being a faithful witness underpins what the photojournalist ideally does. And certainly by that I mean that we capture truthful, honest, accurate, spontaneous moments. Moments that ideally add meaning and context to help people understand the world better and to be free and self-governing. I think that free and self-governing is right out of the textbook that I use. We also want to help students, of course, to solve their ethical problems quickly if they're working in journalism, because the moments in photojournalism that we capture can vanish like ice cubes under the tropical sun. Now, the theme of my talk today was speaks to this dilemma. These moments that we capture are so perishable, they evaporate in a fraction of a second. Yet they run their whole range of human behavior, from actions and interactions and newsmakers to the ordinary emotions and behavior of ordinary citizens. Think about the tidal wave of refugees we've seen, on television or on the internet coming from Syria. But as a matter of course, in visual journalism, our ethical challenges come in a heartbeat. Now there's no doubt that we visual journalists use people as a means to an end. It's hard to get away from that idea. It's a dilemma that would give the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T, and the followers under the banner or the rubric of deontology, people who believe in universal modes of behavior. We don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't steal, we don't use people as a means to an end. This would give fits to the deontologists who focus on the rightness and the wrongness of an act rather than the consequences of an act. But in a moment, in the end, we have to ask ourselves, can the end ever justify the intrusive means that we photojournalists use? And there are many problems where the idea of the ends versus the means. I want to show you a picture by a photographer named Kevin Carter, a South African, who photographed this child outside the gates of a famine hospital or famine camp in Sudan in East Africa. The picture won the Pulitzer Prize World Press Photo Contest and was much celebrated in the mid-1990s as kind of an iconic photograph of the perils of Africa in the throes of famine and so forth. But it really couldn't survive the test of transparency. After the photograph was published on the front page of the New York Times, many, many places, it won so many awards, people began to ask, what were the circumstances under which this picture was taken? And it turns out that the photographer waited for 2 hours to get the perfect alignment of light and subject and so forth, all the while as this child suffered. And not being able to withstand that test of transparency, the photographer, with his Pulitzer Prize and other awards, committed suicide. And another picture of the photographers behaving badly. The problem, I think, is the nature of journalism itself. It's unlicensed. And there's no body of knowledge for us to study or practice or to profess. There are no governing organizations or norms. And unlike other professions, journalists are focused ideally, at least on being loyal to the truth and to the public and to a functioning democracy, not to their clients or to their patients or to a company. Anyone can call himself or herself a journalist. All of these people call themselves journalists, especially if their pictures and stories get posted on the internet, published or broadcast. But as a professional journalist by contrast, I think, holds himself or herself to the ideals that are morally permissible in ways that go way beyond, and the word way beyond are the key words here, beyond the law, beyond the market, beyond morality, beyond public opinion, what those would otherwise require. Being a journalist today is defined no longer by who you work for, but by how you work. Now, as journalism has become more professional, we have found ways to professionalize the idea of ethics. And certainly one of them is in various codes of ethics. Typically we have aspirational codes of ethics that are short, to the point, and they let us make our own decisions, but they tell us what we aspire to. Or on the other side of the case, they all stress certain ideas like accuracy, verification, independence, and fairness. Here, on the other side of the coin, we have codes of ethics that I call codes of practical behavior. Here's the New York Times Code of Ethics. It's 54 pages long, 114 paragraphs. And at the end of it, there's a place for the employee to sign his or her name. Because when you break it, the lawyers can say you're fired because you broke or you violated paragraph 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. code of practice that we deal with. On the other end of the coin, and I'll just use a few lines from the National Geographic's Code of Ethics, the aspirational code of ethics. It tells us how we aspire to be journalists. We resist being manipulated by staged photo opportunities, including press conferences. We treat subjects with dignity and respect. Special consideration is given to the vulnerable. Compassion for victims of crime, tragedy, etc. We don't manipulate images. We don't accept gifts. I once had the emir of the Persian Gulf Kingdom of Bahrain trying to give me a gold Rolex watch with a bezel, a diamond encrusted bezel. And when I told him I couldn't accept this, he said, "It's funny, the people from Time Magazine didn't have it in common." Anyway, our codes of ethics. We, and Allison will recognize this, we have other means of working through our ethical dilemmas. Our students know something called the Potter Box, developed by the Harvard Divinity School Professor Ralph Potter, that is a pathway toward ethical decision making, being able to quickly define our problems and what values are at stake and what ethical models or ethical theories, whether it's Aristotle's golden mean or the consequentialist idea of the greatest social good for the greatest number of people, whatever, and then come up with a way of understanding how our lives are often in conflict. Okay, as I finish up here, I just want to say that in the end, I think we photojournalists, while acknowledging all kinds of inherent ethical problems, particularly the intrusiveness of what we do, the homeless on the main street of St. Petersburg, Russia. We have to think about this and train ourselves in advance to know where we stand, where we're confronted with ethical dilemmas. Here's the KGB headquarters in Moscow on a day where there is a big holiday. I knew it was illegal to stand there and take that picture, and that 3 or 4 plainclothes police officers would try to take my camera the minute I pulled it up. But I also thought that it was vitally important during the days of the Cold War to photograph that headquarters of the KGB, Overseas Intelligence Arm of the Soviet Union and its secret police. As I said, the intrusiveness of what we do. A Hindu funeral ritual, preparing the funeral pyre in Trinidad. A mother who's just been given her baby who passed away during the famine in Bangladesh. Those fleeting moments of grief. In the end, I default to, I think, the great Robert Capa, probably the greatest war photographer who have ever lived. Capa's aphorism was that if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. And that I think that in the end, we're after these decisive moments, these moments that are unique and irretrievable, where the message of the story comes together with the right kind of light and design to create a truly compelling image. That's the ideal. And it all happens in an instant. And in that instant, we have to believe that we're doing the right thing. Thank you very much.